Zoom, you may be seated.
Are we ready for Elder Donio to retake the stand?
Yes.
Good afternoon, Elder Donio.
Good afternoon, sir.
So this afternoon, I wanted to ask you about some concepts in Anishinaabe culture. And the first one that I wanted to ask you about is the term Minobemadzewin. Are you familiar with that term?
I am.
Okay. And can you explain to the court what it means?
Minobemadzewin generally in and of itself means good life or good living. Embodied within that term or that concept is a number of other kind of subheadings or other beliefs that are inculcated therein. When we talk about living a good life or live a good life, as we would have been instructed as young people to do, incorporated in that are concepts such as Nokiwin. Nokiwin means work or working. And the belief was that if you have gainful employment, it's good for you. You need gainful employment. It is essential for a healthy soul and a healthy mind. Gnuwen Jigewin, another concept contained therein, means looking after yourself and looking after those around you, looking after your family, looking after your extended family, and indeed looking after your community as a whole. Meshkadunamagewin, another concept contained, and that has to do with trading of items, tradings of services, trading of goods with your family members, with your extended family members, with your community, and in fact, sometimes with other communities. There would be the trading.
Can you explain that a bit more? Trading of goods?
Trading the goods, trading of services, trading of items that sometimes it's more sacred items. And it could be something as basic as sustenance, food, fishing, hunting, things that we have gotten that way. Be trading those within the community and sometimes with other communities. If there were neighboring communities, that would happen. For example, I recall one year being really lucky and getting 2 moose. Well, Dad went and traded it off with somebody down in another community for something else. So, those kinds of things. Kinomagewin, meaning teaching. Kinomaduin, Kinomagewin, adjective, noun, depending on how we want to use it. And that again meant that you were taught, you were teaching your family, you were teaching your extended family, you were teaching the young people, especially the values of living a good life, and teaching the community. And as an elder, again, those kinds of things are paramount to our existence within the communities that we are in today. Migoewin is giving or gifting. There are certain things you share, and there are other things you gift. That sharing, we do it because that's how we survive, for the betterment of ourselves, for our Minobemadzewin and the Minobemadzewin of our extended families and our community. Migoewin is the gifting of things, again, to community members. Migoewin often extends beyond just the family. It will include extended family and other community members. Miigwech is essentially the concept of giving. And that is, we give to others what we have, we give to others what we may not need, we give to others what we may have a surplus of. And sometimes reciprocity is part of the process, but not always. Just because I give you something does not mean that I expect that tomorrow comes along and you're going to give me something. But there is the expectation that we look after one another, and and we do so by giving stuff away. Madhokid is really the sharing of our resources, the sharing of our wealth. And by wealth, I don't mean dollars and cents. Our wealth varies. Our wealth could be a bountiful fall harvest of fish, or a bountiful, plentiful hunting trip. So we share that with, again, primarily with our community, with our family, but it goes beyond that. Minat is essentially giving, the giving of something to someone, or a group of someone's, or to a family. Bigid Nigewin is sort of closely tied with that, and Bigid Nigewin is more like, if I can liken it to a mini potlatch. We hear the potlatch ceremony of the West Coast, where people literally gave away their wealth. Bigid Nigewin is when you do that on a smaller basis, where it might be a community activity, where we all come together, we all put things into a center spot, and people will take things. People will put things, people will take things. At the end of the day, everyone goes away with something, and there was never a value put on it to say, oh, look at that guy, they only brought this, as opposed to, oh, look at that person, they brought this. It was accepted and understood that we would always do so within our means. And that is what we did. We would find articles, we would find nutritional stuff sometimes, food, but that was all part of what we did. Ndinoe Magnanik refers to our relations and relationships with others, with the family, with the extended family, and with the community, with all our relatives. And oftentimes that would tie into other communities. For example, it wasn't unusual for families to say to primarily the male members, the sons, that you're reaching that age where you may start looking for a life companion soon. Most of the women your age kind of thing most of them are relatives, and it's time for the betterment and for the health of the community that maybe you should move on to another community. And off you would go. You weren't banished by any stretch of the imagination, but you were encouraged to go and to go elsewhere and seek your next step in life. So the consequence of that, of course, is now you have relatives not just here, but in community B and maybe community C, depending on where that person would have gone. So when we talk about relationships and relatives, that's one of the aspects that we look at. But we also looked at our relationship with nature, with the earth, with all that is around us. And it would be incumbent upon us to make sure that we care for and look after those resources around us. Take care of the land, respect the land, take care of the waters, because the waters will provide us with the sustenance that we need, as will the land. The land will provide us with good game when we engage in winter activities of trapping. The waters will provide us with nutrition and food So it's those kinds of things, and that was ingrained in me going right back to being a child. When I was living with the bus, I remember so she would have been 100 years old at least, and we would walk every day a few miles down the road where there was this old man who I swear he would have been 100 years old, but he was old, and we would in the spring we would help him plant his garden, and in the fall we would help him bring in his harvest. And over the summer, we would travel down whatever kind of schedule she had. I don't recall, but I know periodically we would go down and weed his garden. And his garden wasn't your backyard garden, or wasn't the size of this room. It was huge, probably 5 times the size of this room. And he would grow potatoes and carrots and cabbage and beets and turnips. And our compensation or reciprocity for our help is come fall, we would get a good supply of that we would take home and cool store and use for however long it would manage to get us through. It was on one of these excursions where I came into my first face-to-face experience with catching an animal, because we would set snares primarily for rabbit, because rabbit would give us nutrition, the meat that we would get from a rabbit, but it would also provide us with some raw material, furs that we might use for making a blanket, making socks, doing those kinds of things. And I remember we walked, and it was probably 2.5 miles there and the same coming back. So we were probably halfway to his farm. We stopped for a bite to eat, and Daba said, and all of this is going on in Anishinaabe, because that's all that she spoke. And she said to me, go check the snare. Okay, so off I went. We were sitting on a log here. I went trotting off into the bush. Well, if there isn't a rabbit in there. And when I went to get it, it was alive. So it hadn't pulled a noose tight enough yet to kill it. So I went running back and I said, we got a rabbit. And she says, well, go get it. I said, well, it's still alive. She said, well, then you got to kill it. So I'm looking to pick up a stick, and she says, what are you doing? I said, well, I want to get a stick, maybe to hit it. And she said, no, because if you hit it, then you will be damaging the fur, and we need the fur. So I said, what do you do? And she says, Embe, which in Ojibwe means, come on, come here. So we go walking, and I remember her to this day that she picks up the rabbit by the chest and turns it over and just squeezes the chest to stop the heart, and then we have a rabbit. But I was a little kid, I'm thinking, oh my God. But that's what we did, and that's what we had to do in order for us to attain our Mino B'Madsuen that we spoke of. But again, it was done in a respectful way, because we respected the earth, all of the animals, the waters, and we did our best to take care of things, and that's what we did. If we lunched out in the bush, we would never leave things there, because she would look and she'd say, where's that little bag your sandwich was in? I said, she said, no. Naskan means go get it. I'd have to get it and bring it back, and because we had to take care of what we had. Within those concepts, bless you. We also have the grandfather teachings, which was paramount in everything that we did. We lived by it. And as an elder, we're especially expected that nobody has to remind you, but these are the teachings that you will live by. These are the teaching that you will embody. In all that you say and do, you will do these kinds of things. We talk about respect, love, humility, truth, honesty, wisdom, courage, all of those. And the Anishinaabe terms are there as well. Menendemuin, Zagadiwin, Debwewin, they're all there. And these are the virtues by which we are expected to live and conduct our daily lives. And that was stressed to us right from all the way growing up. That was encouraged and expected of us.
So there were a number of very important concepts that you mentioned in that answer, things like sharing, gifting, all our relations, the grandfather teachings. I do want to return to some of those and dig into them deeper. But before I do, let's stick with the overarching concept of Minobemazewin first. And so how important is the concept of Minobemazewin for an Anishinaabe person?
It is critical. Minobemazewin is not something that we strive for and reach on graduation day. It's something that we live forever. We always strive, for a good life. We don't say, hey, I've got it now, I'm all set. That never happened. It's something that you work for on a daily basis all the time. It's something I believe that I'm still doing today, and I'm not young anymore. I'm getting up there, but again, that's what, Grandpa and all the other people taught me to do. You don't attain it and get it and say done. It's something that you work towards all the time.
So then what does one do to work for, to pursue Minobemazewin?
We work hard, we share, we live a good life, we offer a hand when we see that help is needed, we offer care when we feel someone is in need of care, and that care could come in the form of looking after people's families. I recall when I was being raised by Udabas or Rosalie, as was her name, it wasn't being, and this is really when it came home to me, that it's not being done because mom and dad don't want me. It was being done because those people want me, and they want me in their life, and they want to take care of me. Because while they were taking care of me, my mom and dad took in somebody else's child for probably 2 to 3 years. And I guess the mother wasn't in particularly good health. And so mom and dad took in Mark, and Mark went to live with them. So he was kind of like my adoptive brother. And it was, those kinds of things were never frowned on by the community. It wasn't done for monetary reasons. It was done out of the teachings that we live by and are expected to live by. That people are in need, we are capable of doing something, and we did it. And that's just how it was.
And so are you able to speak about the relationship, if any, between material wealth or material resources and the pursuit of Minobemazewin?
Well, certainly material resources are an essential part of Minobemazewin. You need a house, you need shelter, you need sustenance, you need the basics, you need essential items that will enable you to do things like to get wood. You need a saw, you need an axe, you need a sled, you need a good dog team to help pull your sled. So you need those kinds of physical items in order for you to continue to strive for a Minobemazewin, a good life or a better life. And this was particularly significant for us in our communities when we looked at some of the elderly, more elderly or infirm people who may not have been able to do those kinds of things for themselves. So we would look at it, and I remember Davos saying to me, well, we should go and do this for so-and-so. And it never was something where I said, well, I don't want to go and do that for them. And we just did it because the old lady recognized, knew something, knew people, and said, those people need a hand with something. So we will go and do it. So we needed that. As development came around us, employment opportunities arose, and people realized that now we can work, but we can get money. So that the Hudson Bay store, the private entrepreneurs that were there that had set up stores, they have goods, but in order for us to get those goods, we need either other goods like pelts that we could trade, or money that we could buy some of the things that we need. It wasn't uncommon for working activities to be undertaken, that I need A and B and C, and for that I would be willing to help you by doing these things for you. And that was something that that would be done, that would be carried out. Doing those things enabled us to work towards a Manubmadsuin.
And so building on that, is there a particular level or a minimum level of material wealth or resources that would be required to pursue or to attain Minobamadzuen?
I would say that would be really dependent on you, the size of your family, the size of your extended family, because quite often your family might include grandma and grandpa, because they're getting a little elderly, they're a bit infirmed and they can't take care of themselves. And of course, way back then, we didn't have seniors homes. We didn't have group homes. It was incumbent that your wealth included your children. And when you reached the point where you couldn't do that anymore, there was an expectation that your children and family would come and do it for you. And if they couldn't, then you would move in with them. And it wasn't frowned upon. And you weren't, embarrassed by the fact that, oh, I have to look after grandma and grandpa now. We just did, because that's what we did to help the community work towards Minubmadsuin. So there was never a time where we reached it. The resources that we would need there was certainly a minimum. We had to be able to sustain ourselves. We had to put a roof over our head. We had to be able to provide for our family, be it our nuclear family, our extended family, our community. In order to attain and work towards the attainment of these things, we would need certain things. We would need resources, and certainly when when the fish plant was established in the community, when the sawmill was set up, well then, people would work there. They would undertake small contracts to mill certain kinds of wood for the railway when the railway was going through. And that would be done in exchange for money which they could then use to go to one of the stores to attain the other goods that they would need for Minubmadsuin.
And so you mentioned a minimum level of sustenance being needed to pursue Minobamadzuen. Is that all that is required? The minimum just for subsistence, or is more required?
Well, the ideal was always more, because the focus was not just the here and now. It wasn't just today. There was always a focus as well on the future, on future generations. What are we going to do to make sure that our kids, I think much the same as people today, they say, what can I do to make sure that when my kids are going out, that it's easier for them than it was for me? I think a lot of elderly parents feel that way, that I want to make sure that life for them might be just a tad easier than it was for me. And of course, we're looking at a different socioeconomic era where life was tough back then. We didn't have, say, oh, it's chilly in here, could you turn up the heat a couple of degrees? I mean, it's put a couple more logs on the fire. well, we're kind of running out of wood. Well, then you know what you're doing tomorrow? You're going to get some more wood. So, that was the way things were back then. But we need stuff. We needed things. We need stuff for today. We need stuff for the future. Savings. We saved all the time. When we hunted, when we fished, we would have a catch that we know that we weren't going to devour at all. So we would dry it. We would cut it, we would dry it, and we would save it for the winter months. If we had, one moose or more, we would share and we would dry so that we saved. So while we didn't have a bank to run to say, hey, I got another $10, I'm going to go and deposit this into the bank, we saved other things because we knew the value of saving and what we could do tomorrow because we don't have to do it right now.
You mentioned some traditional activities, traditional pursuits like fishing, trapping, hunting. So I wanted to ask, what is the relationship between access to material wealth and being able to pursue those activities?
Well, the material wealth that you might have could include things like perhaps a motor vehicle, because as logging was being rapidly developed in the area, came logging roads. So the area where my father and my grandparents traditionally trapped during the winter months, as a child, I wasn't quite sure how far they would go. But as I grew up and started to hunt and fish with them, I realized this is a long jaunt. So in the old days, my dad and his in-laws and his parents would hook up the dog team and they would go cross country by dog team from A to B, with usually at least one stopover in the place where we now camp traditionally in the fall as we undertake to do our hunting that we do. They used to do it on snowshoes and a dog team. And because that's the wealth that they had, that's the value assets that they had. Well, when my dad was finally able to afford a vehicle, not a brand new one, I don't think he ever owned a brand new vehicle, but it was new to him, as he used to say. It's new to me.
I won't ask you for the make and model.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I still remember it though, but I won't say. But he would, so he then reached the point where he could drive out to his traditional trapping area, park the vehicle, go by snowshoes, check his traps, bring his furs back to the community. And when I was going to university, I mentioned earlier, I was on a scholarship. So not quite the first thing, but one of the very early things I did was I bought a car because I need to get around. So I bought an old car. And what the second major acquisition for me was buying a Skidoo. And when I bought it, it wasn't for me, it was going to be for my dad. But I thought to surprise him pleasantly, I borrowed a friend's truck. So I bought the Skidoo, they put it in the back. I drove down to the reserve. I was visiting with my dad and he was looking out and he said, "Oh, that's a nice machine. Whose is that?" I said, "Well, I borrowed Kelly's truck." And he says, "Oh, nice machine." I said, "Why don't we take it for a ride?" He says, "No, we shouldn't. It's not ours." I said, "I know, but Kelly's my friend and he won't mind." So we lifted it off the truck and we took it for a ride and he took it and he just loved it. He just thought this was the cat's meow. So, so when I was heading back home the next day, he said, "Oh, we should go and load the machine back on the truck." And I said, "No, Dad, actually, it's yours. You can have it. I bought it and it's yours." Well, he was so moved by it that I had done this. And I said, "There you go." But what that enabled him to do was to now go out to his trap line and increase perhaps his material wealth. Instead of walking 12 kilometers, he could now skidoo 25 kilometers or more to do a loop. He could set more traps with the little sleigh that he would pull behind it. He could load his furs onto that. So it greatly increased his ability to increase his wealth. And I don't have them on today, but I have on Hudson's Bay socks, and I don't like Hudson's Bay, but my wife bought them for me, and she says, I got you these socks because you can stomp on Hudson's Bay every day. So so I do wear them. But I remember once when my dad, came in from trapping, he had this big catch of furs. So he went to the Hudson's Bay in Nipigon, and they said, oh, Robbie, my dad's name was Robert, but everybody called him Robbie. They said, you got a really nice catch here. So they're looking at them and they're going through them. They said, we'll give you $375 for the lot. So back then in the 50s, early 60s, that was a good chunk of change. And my dad says, no, I think I'm going to keep them. So he goes back to the reserve. He sends them away to a big fur auction in North Bay. Sidney I. Robinson was the company that he would have sent it to back in the 60s. And so he's all delighted, checking the mail in the next couple of weeks, and he gets a check for $350 with a letter that says, here's the first part of your payment. When the auction is complete, we will send you the balance. So a month or so later, he gets another check for $375. So he got $675 for the furs that Hudson Bay said was a great catch, and we'll give you $350 for them. But again, he was able to, my dad was a veteran of the Second World War, so he'd been around. He'd, not under the best of times, mind you, but he'd been to France and Italy and Germany and England and everywhere, and had a bit of a worldview from, mind you, not in the best of times, but he did, and he knew that he could do that, and that's what he did. But the value increased for him was the acquisition of the truck by him and the Skidoo by me that enabled him to do more, to continue to work towards a Minabemazin for his family.
And so far, we've been speaking a lot about Minabemazin from the perspective of the individual and the individual Anishinaabe person. Can you speak about how the pursuit of Minabemazin might be different from the community level, looking at it from the level of the community or the collective?
Yes. Well, when my dad was younger, there was a sawmill on what is now Sandpoint. And the mill was community owned. It employed members of the community to work there, to both get the trees out of the bush and make it into raw lumber. And what they did was, when the railway in particular was going through, they would make contracts with the railroad to say, we can provide you railway ties. How many might you need, and so on. So the community mill would do that. And that revenue would come back into the community. And Sandpoint was a booming community back then. They had little docks that they had built. They assisted people with lumber from the mill to build boats, because people used to build their own boats. So that venture enabled the community to attain a better degree of Minabemazin. So in addition to the community, the individuals too, because they would be employed at the mill doing that. When Indian Affairs made their relocation effort at one time to McIntyre Bay, again, the entrepreneurial spirit surfaced, and they had a mill there, which mysteriously burnt down. They rebuilt the mill, were selling timber, were making money, and guess what happened the second time? Mysteriously, the mill burnt down again. So the leadership of the community approached Indian Affairs because Indian Affairs was all the controller of the money. They controlled and trusted the assets, financial money aspects of the band. So they said, the band said, well, we would like to get some of our money, get some of our money to rebuild the mill. And their answer was no. No explanation, just no. So no money, the mill's burnt down. And so even though the initiative and the desire for the creation of a greater Manub-Madzuwen, it wasn't permitted. Another community that I'm very familiar with, I have a lot of relatives who live there. There was an older man who, the city of Thunder Bay used to be provided by water from the reserve. So this man's responsibility was every day checking the line, going up the mountain, down the mountain, making sure there were no leaks, making sure the intake wasn't getting plugged up at the lake. And that's what he did. And he was getting on in years, so he decided that I'm going to write a letter to Indian Affairs to request money. And again, this is not requesting them to give their money to do something. This was asking them to release money. That probably is a better word to use. Release some of our money. I would like to buy a horse so I could ride the horse up the mountain and back down. Sounded reasonable to them. And the answer was no. No explanation. In fact, I saw the letter kind of like this where the request was, and across the front of it says denied. And that was it. So it was, again, a really stifling effect of, here we are trying to work towards Manub-Madzuwen, and with our own resources available to us, they said no. So it was frustrating. So there were ways that the community tried to work better, because the realization among the people, among us, was that Manub-Madzuwen is not just me. It's my family, my immediate family, my neighbors, my relatives, my community. It's all of that that we strive for.
And so I want to return to one of the concepts that you mentioned earlier, and that's the concept of all our relations. And are you able to provide us with the Anishinaabe-Moan word again for that concept?
I would say Ndinue Maganak, or the plural would be a bit more complicated. This one, the plural isn't in the glossary of terms, just the singular is Dinue Magananik, which means all of us in all of our relations.
And what role does this concept play in Anishinaabe culture?
Well, again, it's central to our being, that our being is not just me. It's not just me and my family, but we have to be, and we must be mindful of all of our relatives, our family, our extended family, our family, perhaps in other communities. And when we're striving to attain a better life, a better way of living, we must be mindful of those kinds of things. We must also be mindful of Mother Earth. You might hear people talking about, it's our responsibility to look after Mother Earth. That is, this was provided here for us to care for, not own, because we don't consider ourselves as being owners, but we consider ourselves as we are caretakers, and that is our obligation. And that's why when you see and hear of some of the things that are going on, that for a lot of the older people in particular, it was very stressful and very harmful and very hurtful. In Northwestern Ontario, in the late 60s, early 70s, we heard of the mercury contamination in the English River Wabigoon system. And I remember talking and I did a lot of traveling in that area. I made a lot of friends with a lot of the elders and other, just older people in the community. And I recall them talking about how devastated they were by what was going on because they were supposed to take care of things a lot better. And when we welcomed the settlers into the country and into our territory, and when they started to develop with our blessing, a lot of stuff, the understanding and the expectation is that you would also take care of these kinds of things. Not just making money, but taking care of the land, all of our relations, the plants, the animals, the fish, the harvesting, the gathering. But that didn't quite meet with their expectations clearly were not met. They didn't see that as being honored at all.
So how does this concept of all of our relations relate to the connection between the Anishinaabe people and the land?
Well, the land is part of our relations, all of the animals, the water, the trees, the plants that grow, the medicines that we harvest from the land. It's all interrelated because going way back, we didn't have pharmacies. We didn't have walk-in clinics. So certain elders would be recognized as being gifted in certain areas. So we would go to the elder's house and say, you know, my kid fell last couple of weeks ago and his leg looks like it's getting really badly infected. And I don't know what to do. And you would go to elders who you know were taught in that way and they have developed and evolved even better. And they would say, oh, okay, well, go out to the bush and get this kind of willow, take the bark, do this with it, apply it as a poultice, and you know, change it a few times and you should notice some improvements. So we did those kind of things with the land. I mean, the land was our pharmacy. I remember going out with my grandfather and I wished I paid more attention now to what exactly he was picking. But I remember when you would go into your grandma and grandpa's house, there were two big galvanized pails sitting on the stove. They had a big wood stove, the kind with the big reservoir at the end. So they would have these two galvanized pails sitting on the stove. In one pail was tea, and in the other pail were roots that grandpa would boil. So I would go out with him. He would take his roots that had been in there for some time. I don't know how long, but it's just some time. And then he would take them, put them out in the bush, and we would go and dig up new ones. And this is where I wish I'd paid more attention. What did he dig up? You know, but he would dig them up and shake off all the excess dirt, put them in a pail. We'd go back to the house, he'd fill it up with water, start the boiling process, and then the simmering process on the side of the stove. And when the other old people would come and visit, they would come in and they'd pick up their galvanized cup or a galvanized cup, dip it into not the teapot, but the other pot, I used to call it. And they would sit there and they would talk and drink their medicinal stuff. And then they'd be off. And that was a regular part of life in the community. So when we talk about all our relations, our respect for the land, I mean, the land is what sustained us, not just with food and shelter, but with medicines that we would need.
And so given that connection to the land that you spoke about, what is the significance to the Anishinaabe people of allowing others to have access to that land or the resources on it?
Well, the significance is that we, again, we embody the sharing. When we look at the wampum belts that I brought before me, we have the dish with one spoon, which is historically the wampum belt depicting sharing. That there's one bowl, we all eat from it. There's one land, we all share of it, but there's also an obligation to care for. So the expectation and And I remember I was up in Osnaburg a year working, and there was an elder, two elders that I really befriended while I was there. And one of them actually remembers the king coming over and meeting up in the Osnaburg area. And he talked about hearing personally the reassurances that there's no need to worry because the great white mother and the great white father will take care of you. They will make sure that their, I forget the word he used for, that their people would be well looked after and cared for. And they took it to heart. They said, okay, if that's what we're being told, then we should be people of our word. We shouldn't have to say, could you sign here, please? And then I'll believe you. It was like that never existed back then. That's you were your word. And so the anticipation, the hopes, the expectations were that you will be welcomed in. We will allow to share with you. We will allow you to extract, but we will also reciprocity. We expect that there will be some returning of the goodwill in some way at some time.
And so you related it to sharing and gift giving. What is the value of that gift or what's being shared from the perspective of the Anishinaabe?
Well, again, the value is that it will enable us in one way or another to individually and collectively attain a better degree of Manub-Madzuin. I mean, when you think of Manub-Madzuin, there's the basics. You get by, you've got a roof over your head, you got a bed you sleep on, and you have food for today. But we want to look at it in terms of tomorrow and the next day and the next generation, our children, our grandchildren. We want to look at it in that way.
So that actually leads me to the next point that I wanted to ask you about, and that's how does the concept of all our relations that we've been discussing, how does that relate to other generations?
Well, it relates to other generations in terms of us being taught that our obligation extends beyond us. Our obligations extend beyond our immediate family, our extended family. Our obligation extends to other generations. We talk a lot about 7 generations. So let's not think about today. Let's not think about tomorrow, but let's think about, those who are going to be coming after us. I don't mean that in the sense of the law coming after you. I mean, those following in our footsteps, if I can use that kind of phraseology. And let's be mindful of that what are we going to do today to hopefully attain a better lifetime for them, for the yet unborn. And that's how it was always referred to. We didn't have necessarily, as I can recall, a word for the next generation, but we talked about the evolution that has been the thinking of 7 generations, but it was our future, those who will come after us. Let's think about them and let's be mindful of them, and let's not just think about us. What are we going to do for me and us and my family right now?
And so then you mentioned the 7 generations. And so what is the significance of 7 generations?
Well, the significance is that we are here, there is a life cycle, and we want to be mindful of those people and ensuring their Manub-Madzuin.
And so I want to return to a concept that you've touched on and mentioned a few times in your previous answer, and that's the concept of sharing. And so can you expand on that, explain a little bit, what does the concept of sharing mean to the Anishinaabe people?
To us, it means that we will share with you what we have, and the greatest asset, if I can use that word, that we have to share is our land and resources. We would hope for reciprocity. We would hope for a sharing back, that you take, you acquire, you amass your kind of wealth, but that we would also reap some benefits from that. You know, the old belief that you reap what you sow. If we're good to you, we open up our lands to you, that we should, in all righteousness, receive something back in return. So sharing wasn't a one-way street. You know, when I look at the two-row wampum, we talk about, you know, the two cultures, the mixing of the settlers versus the indigenous populations, and the sharing that we will have with each other. So we did, and we would hope you would, kind of thing.
And so how important is that conception of sharing in Anishinaabe culture?
It's critical. It's critical. It's the essence of our existence. You know, that's how we live, and that's how we lived. And sadly, in many ways, the government's intention or plans of development oftentimes interfered with that, and in fact stifled it. I can use that word. I think of an example when I went into when I was working in one of the communities. The government built a huge building with compartments, and they turned out to be freezer compartments, thinking, we'll do really good. We're going to build these things. So you'd show up and they'd say, here's your key for your compartment. Here's yours. Here's yours. And what that did was it now stifled the quality of sharing beyond your immediate family. Because now I've got a freezer. Well, you know, that moose that I shot, I can butcher, I can freeze a good part of it. And then I don't have to worry about going out in the middle of the winter when it's freezing cold and trying to get another one. So the thinking was that I'm doing something good for the community, but in many ways, you're really creating a problem for the community by bringing in that notion. And it wasn't a community, I found out it wasn't a community consultation process. It was just, this is what we think we will do because it's going to be better for you. You know, that kind of always, this is going to be good for you, trust me.
And so then what was the importance of the concept of sharing historically for the Anishinaabe earlier than that point, for example?
You know, earlier than that point, it was absolutely critical. It was a belief. It was a foundation of our society. You know, the sharing, it was a foundation of our society. That's how we lived. That's what it was all about.
And so related to the concept of sharing, but perhaps slightly different, is the concept that you mentioned of gift giving. And can you speak to what role gift giving plays in Anishinaabe culture?
Again, it's very closely tied to sharing. But gift giving is a little bit different in that it is not necessarily something essential to subsistence. It is really, it's a quality that they tried to instill in us that we do for people. We give things away, we gift things, we do these kinds of things. I remember respectfully getting into a big heated debate with one of the senior justice advisors in Toronto. Because when I was first appointed, I'm telling tales, this is all on the record too. That's okay, I'll do it anyway. We had these training sessions where we would go for, 10, 12 weeks a year or more to orient us and train us to be a better justice of the peace. And we had all these excellent resource people who would come in. We had judges, lawyers, crowns, all come in to teach, and they really, really, really did great work, and it helped us be better at what we did. And at the end of their session, they would get a pen, not a gold pen, not a fancy pen, but something that you get out of a hotel and you'd write your name on, and kind of thing, and say, here's a lovely gift for you. Well, when I became the senior native justice and I organized many, many of these training sessions, we made gifts that we would give. Well, I was chastised. I said, you can't do that. And I said, why not? Because we made dream catchers, different kind of native crafty things that we would make and give to people. I said, we have to. It's essential in our culture that we give gifts. And the people who were the recipients of these gifts were delighted. They were pleased. They were overwhelmed. For many of them, they'd never received one before. But it seemed odd that I had to kind of fight to give something away. I said, I'm not giving away our life savings. It's not like I'm going in the poorhouse tomorrow. These are things we've made to give people to say, thank you for doing what you're doing for us. And that's kind of how we were historically, and in many communities to this day continue to be.
And so how is the gift giving influenced by the wealth of the gift giver?
Well, it's certainly a lot of the gift giving was individual. And of course, if you were a person of means, you could do well at doing that. But a lot of the gift giving also came from the community. And so it would be, what is the collective wealth of the community that would enable us to do these kinds of things? Many of the people in the communities were wonderful craftspeople, primarily women, but a lot of the men too were good craftspeople. The making of craft wasn't necessarily a gender divided kind of opportunity. And so a lot of things would be made and be gifted to people. We didn't have a lot of money. We couldn't buy a lot of things, but we had a lot of resources. We could make things. And those are the kinds of things that we would give away. And it was always expected that, like, people knew that if a family didn't have a lot, we don't expect them to give much. But there was that unwritten expectation that we will all do this and we will continue to do it. And we do, and we did, and we still do.
And so when you give a gift of value, when an Anishinaabe person gives a gift of value to someone, what's the understanding of what they will receive from the person they're giving the gift to?
There's not an immediate expectation that I'm giving you this gift, so tomorrow you're going to give me an equal or greater value gift. But there was always the expectation that I'm doing this for you and you will reciprocate, if not to me, to somebody else. I'm sure you've all seen, and perhaps some of you have experienced, going through Tim Hortons and going to pay and having the person say, oh, ma'am, the car in front of you just paid for your sandwich and tea. And you're like saying, well, who are they? You have no idea who they are, but you do. I remember one day my wife and I were going through and she said, let's pay for that vehicle behind us. I said, well, what if they're having more than coffee? She said, well, we'll pay for it. We're not going to starve. So I went, we paid for ours, and I said, we'd like to pay for the vehicle behind us. And she comes back, she says, okay, sir, that'd be $17 and change. I looked at my wife and she said, pay it, use your card. So I paid it, but and I didn't, they don't even know me. So was I expecting someone there to reciprocate? Not to me, but I certainly hoped that by my goodwill towards them, that they in turn would do that to someone else and for someone else. And that's what the communities were like. And that's what, the culture was all about, that we would do it. And if I gave you a really nice knife, because I had two of them, I'm not expecting you to give me a knife tomorrow. Maybe you wouldn't tomorrow. Maybe you would to somebody else the next day. And that's kind of how it would continue throughout the cycle of the community.
And in that cycle, is there an understanding that it comes back to you eventually?
Sure. I mean, Grandpa, my word, not his, would say, you reap what you sow. You do good things for people. You show the kind-hearted person that we want you to be, and it'll come back to you. So, and that's what we were taught. That's what I believed back then, and that's what I believe now and hope for now.
And so can you speak to how these concepts that we've been discussing, like sharing or gift giving, would have applied historically to exchanges between Anishinaabe people and the Crown?
Again, a lot of I remember my grandfather talking to me about his parents and grandparents and what they were led to believe. And they were led to believe that the sharing of wealth, whatever that was, and however it was intended, would come back to us. And that if, we give that which is basically the essence of what we have to offer, our land and resources, we have nothing beyond that. Was there an expectation or a hope that some of that might be reciprocated? Absolutely. And it wasn't just a hope, but it was statements that were made that caused people to believe statements like, the great white father and the great white mother will look after you, means that I'll be okay. I'll be looked after. We'll be looked after. Not just me, but our family, our community would be looked after. So, sharing was critical, not just within our own community, but with the new entrance to the colony, as they would say.
And so I want to return to one other concept that you mentioned earlier, and that's the concept of the grandfather teachings, or the 7 grandfather teachings. And can you explain to the court generally what that concept means?
The grandfather teachings, we were taught and expected that they would be principles by which we would live. They are principles by which we would be involved with other people, involved within our community and outside of our community. That courage, humility, honor, respect, love, bravery, wisdom would all be virtues that we would embody, that we would live by that we would exhibit it, we would demonstrate it, we would show to our kids and grandkids and other community members that this is how you can strive for Minabmadzuin. If you follow these kinds of belief, we will be creating a much better community for all of us. And not just us in terms of the Indigenous population, but for the visitors as well. I mean, I remember when Grandpa and them would talk about, there's new immigrants to the country being given land grants of 160 acres per family going west. And saying, we don't even have that. We're Indigenous. This was our land, which is gone. They've given us this much, and now they're giving away huge parcels of land for new settlers. There was almost an envy that would say, geez, why couldn't that be us? You know, we're trying to get a lands and larger land base. We've got, I mean, when they created the reserve, which I became part of at the end of being kicked off of the original Sand Point, they created Rocky Bay Reserve. And I forget how many people there were at the onset, but there was well over 150 people. We were granted a reserve of 44 acres. And this is when people talked and said, good grief, the new immigrants get 160 acres per family of 5. And we've got a community and they've given us 44. 44 acres of land, which originally was all ours, but which got carved up and doled out in other ways. So was there an expectation of sharing with them? Was there an expectation of living by these virtues, if I want to call them that? Sure there was. And there was hopes that they would. There were hopes that they would deal with us with humility, with courage, with respect. And in spite of how we may have been treated, there was never a wavering from these teachings. You know, I remember talking to my grandpa was, my maternal grandpa was first to die, and I continued to spend time with my maternal grandma, and she never wavered from this. You know, she'd lost her husband, the father of her sons and daughter, but she still believed very strongly in these kinds of things.
And in your answer, I believe you mentioned and you went through what the 7 grandfather teachings were. Can you give us the Anishinaabe words for them as well?
Yes. Menendemoen, respect. Zagaduin, love. And you may hear these from me, which is what I was taught they were, but you may hear other variations to, you know, like you might hear, you know, honesty or truth or likeness or something else that might change it a little bit, but the essence is there for all of them. The Ben Dezuin, humility. Debwe Win, truth. Gwekwadzuin, honesty. Nabuakawin, which is wisdom. And Akwe Ode Win, which would essentially mean courage, strength, fortitude, kinds of things.
And you mentioned earlier, you spoke about how these 7 grandfather teachings relate to a concept that we discussed like Minobamadzuen, but can you tell us how the 7 grandfather teachings relate to concepts like sharing and reciprocity that you mentioned earlier?
Well, inherent in sharing and reciprocity was the hopes and belief that all of us who are involved in these kinds of community activities and lifestyle, that we would all follow the same kinds of qualities, that we would have learned them. They were things that we talked about, certainly within our community and within our teachings. It was something that we would teach to our young people, our children, our adolescents, and we would hope that they would carry that on through whatever kinds of things that they were doing. And when we mingled with the others, with the settlers, there was always a desire on the part of the elders that we would share these kinds of teachings of characteristics with other people, including the non-Indigenous communities.
And so related to that, how do you see the role of the 7 grandfather teachings in reconciliation?
Well, I mean, if we are going to have true reconciliation, we have to start behaving and doing things in a way that demonstrates to both parties, all parties, that these fundamental characteristics and beliefs are going to be inherent in all that we say and do. And if we follow these and we look truly at reconciliation, we should be able to attain something. And certainly we hopefully would attain something quicker than is happening at the pace it's happening today.
Thank you very much. I believe those are all of my questions for Elder Donio, but perhaps this is a good time for us to take the afternoon break and I'll consult with co-counsel.
Beautiful.
Let's do that. Shall we take 15 minutes?
That works.
All right. Thank you all.
All rise. This court will recess for 15 minutes. This court will now resume. You may be seated.
So I just have a few more questions for you, Elder Donio.
Yes, sir.
And the first one is in going through the glossary of terms that I presented, I believe there's one term on there that we haven't discussed yet. And that is, you mentioned Rocky Bay First Nation a few times. Is there a current name or a more modern name for that First Nation?
Yes, the name is Binjitawabik Zaging Anishinaabeg. And I would have to say that one of the early things I did as an elder in the community was they wanted to revert and change to an Anishinaabe name. And because of the bay that Rocky Bay was situated on, they say Pidgetawabik, but the correct word is Binjitawabik, which means entering into the mountains. And so I was instrumental in coming up with that name for the community.
And it's sometimes abbreviated as BZA.
Correct, BZA.
And I had a couple more questions. I wanted to return to the concept of Minobemazawin that we discussed quite a bit in your testimony. And my question is Minobemazawin different for every different Anishinaabe person, or is there an overarching or common core to it?
There are overarching principles and cores, but it also may differ slightly in terms of what do I feel Minobemazawin means for me, which may mean a little bit of something different for my neighbor or for somebody else. So they're not vast differences that it means something for you and something totally different for someone else. They all embody the concept of a good life, living a good life, being a good person, encouraging and supporting a good life for all. And from individual good lives comes a good and healthy community.
And so how does what one needs for Minobemazawin change over time?
It changes over time in as much as, say, for example, as a child, for Minobemazawin, you need a loving, you need a loving, caring, and healthy family environment in which to prosper. As an adolescent, there are basics that are standard to all, like housing and sustenance and those kinds of things. But as young children, we need certain things. As adolescents, we need encouragement, we need support, we need stronger teachings. We need teachings of accepting greater responsibilities, those kinds of things. And into adulthood, when you may start your own family. Again, the values and the what you need will again change. And the same goes into becoming a senior, being the elders and the eldest in the communities. again, the needs change from a Mabadzuin, but what you aspire to doesn't change. You know, the betterment of me, the betterment of family, the betterment of the extended family, and the betterment of community. Those kinds of virtue always remain, but your individual needs may change. What you need as a child is not what you need as an adult.
And so you just spoke about how your needs for Minobamazuin might change for the individual as they age. What about from a historic perspective through changing times? How does what one needs for Minobamazuin
Oh.
change?
Wow. I mean, depending on how far back you want to go, subsistence was fairly basic. And as the country evolved and developed, our lives changed dramatically. We went from being self-sufficient to the creation of reserves. And with the creation of reserves came certain restrictions. Like my grandfather and his brothers talked about living at the original Sandpoint and being told by the authorities that you are not allowed to leave this community without permission. And when you got permission to leave, you had to stipulate when you would be back and you had to follow those. So it evolved from a fairly free society where we would go out to the trapping shack, go out to the summer fishing grounds, to suddenly now being restricted as to what you can do, where you can go, and how you can do it. So it changed dramatically. Our needs changed with the establishment of the communities that or reserves that you weren't allowed to leave. There was usually a store nearby, a trading post nearby, and the expectation was that you will get what you need from there. What you can buy, you buy. What you can't, you barter for, you trade, and that's how life is going to be. So it's really changed to today. I mean, again, today it's a whole different world. It's I used to go and visit grandpa and grandma and others a lot back home, and even they couldn't understand some of the changes of city living. Like, what was city living? Like, what do you do and how does it work? I remember when my grandfather was hospitalized at one point when he would have been probably in his early 80s. He was absolutely amazed that he was on the 4th floor of a hospital, 4 floors up. And I didn't even tell him about having been in Toronto and at the TD Center and those kinds of things, because that was beyond him. Like he was, we were looking out over the lake. We could see the sleeping giant. And he said, and I don't know how many times he said, do you know we're on the 4th floor? Because of course, all they would have known were teepees, wigwams, tents, and 1-floor homes. So, I mean, you know, things have changed dramatically. Now we need money. We have hydro. We have utilities that we have to cover. If we have a vehicle, we have to pay for a vehicle. We have to pay for insurance. We have to pay for fuel. So things have changed so dramatically from back then. You know, it's amazing. We've gone from a sustenance, self-sustaining bush kind of economy to the Hudson Bay store or the Northern store or the private entrepreneur store.
Thank you very much. So those are my questions for Elder Donio. So at this time, I would ask that the glossary of Anishinaabemowin terms be marked as the next exhibit on the trial. I believe that would be exhibit 23, 22.
Everyone all right with that?
And then the last thing I would have to say is miigwech, Elder.
Now,
Thank you. And do I expect,
Yeah, I just have a question or
all
two.
right.
Yes, sir.
My name's Harley Schachter and have a couple of questions for you. Just wanted to make sure I understood something. You talked about Minnow-Bomadzuin, and how does the level of health experienced in the non-Aboriginal community near the reserve, would that affect Bomadzuin at all?
It may. Up where I am, most of the reserves are isolated. And by isolated, I don't mean fly-in kinds of communities only, but they're away from everything else. We had originally, when we got moved from Sandpoint to the creation of Rocky Bay, it was a mixed community. And so the community was kind of as one, because as I had mentioned in direct examination, our family members, our first cousins, were on that other side of town. That wasn't the newly created reserve. So they certainly were interacted. Much of the private economy, the private entrepreneurs were from the other side of town. They were, the non-native people who owned the stores, who ran a small resort that was in the community, who provided some employment for some people some of the time. So they were interrelated, and
Maybe I can try and get clarification this way. The Court of Appeal in its judgment or in its decision talks about the relative wealth and needs of two different populations, the Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people. Can you give us some guidance on the relationship between Bomadzuin and relative wealth and needs between the two communities, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal? Is that something you can help us with?
I'm not an economist expert, so I would be really hesitant to go into an area that I'm not entirely familiar with. I'm consider myself knowledgeable about culture, but I, as a citizen, I would have to say that many of our needs are common, regardless of whether Indigenous or non-Indigenous, and particularly if we're in proximity to each other. One may benefit more than the other. One may have more assets than the other, and that may simply be the way it is. Beyond that, I'm not comfortable going into an area of economics that I'm not well
Okay.
versed in.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Elder Donio.
Sir?
So my name is David Rank and I represent Ontario in this matter.
Yes, sir.
And Elder Donio, I want to start by thanking you for sharing with us your experiences and your perspectives today. It's much appreciated. Miigwech.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here to be able to do that.
Now, one of the subjects that you spoke about today was Minnow-Bomadzuin.
Yes, sir.
And I just have a question or two about that to help with my understanding of the concept. And I might frame it up this way. So Elder Donio, you spoke about your work with the youth today. And
Yes, sir.
you indicated it's indicated in the statement, the Will Say statement, that you do volunteer work
Correct.
as a coach, as a Boy Scout leader, and so forth. And the question I have for you, Elder Donio, is could you share with us what you might say to the youth you work with about how to achieve Minnow-Bomadzuin in their own lives?
I would, and I do, in talking with young people. I don't do the Boy Scout thing anymore because my children have all grown and gone, but I spend a lot of time talking to young people within the BNA, Bingwiniashi community. We, for example, in the city of Thunder Bay, the band has a family well-being center. And that center offers programming to the full range of young to old. When I'm dealing with the young people in particular, I have been and I have future commitments to do more. I go in, many of them are interested in what was it like? How did you come to know this? Some of them say, what could we do? What should we be doing? And so I talk to them about Minobimadzuen means living a good life. I talk about the concepts that are included therein. And I talk about things like, you demonstrating that you have the courage to do what you believe in your heart to be right, that you don't follow the leader unless you fundamentally believe that what you're doing is absolutely correct, and then that's your choice to do it. So I talk about the principles that I believe that you need to develop and work on to make your life easier, to make your life better, and to make the life for your family better. So it's something I talk about all the time. I talk about helping. I talk about sharing. I think now in our community, when we have community activities going on, the young people know that at the conclusion of all of our meetings, there's usually a feast of some kind. They know now that from my teachings and my talks with them, that they will help elderly people. Somebody may be in a walker. They will go over to them and say, can I help you get something? So they would help them get their food. I would ask that they tend to them throughout the day, just to say, is everything okay? Can I get you some water? Would you like me to get you a tea or a coffee? Teaching them those kinds of things, that it's good to share. It's good to help your friends. It's good to help your family. Be kind, all the things that parents say to a lot of their kids of how they would like their kids to be. I mean, it's not just Anishinaabe people that wish these kinds of characteristics on their children. I believe all people do. And so I still do that today. I still do it regularly. I engage in cultural activities with them, teaching them how to make a hand drum. And in teaching them, I say, when you make it, don't be disappointed, because your first one is not going to be as good as your 10th one. There's going to be mistakes that you look at it, you'll see a flaw and say, oh, I wish I had done this. I said, that's okay. It will improve. And I also encourage very strongly the notion of gifting, miigwewin, sharing, that, it's good to do these kinds of things, because I remember with my own children, I talked about sharing to the point one day where I said to my youngest at the time, I said, Jay, where's that thing that we bought for you? Oh, I gave it to Jamie. Oh, why did you give it to Jamie? Well, he liked it and he didn't have one. I said, oh, okay, but now you don't have one. He said, I'm okay. But, it's that kind of, you can't help but look at it and say, wow, maybe I did too good a job here. Maybe I should back it off a notch or two, but they do. And that's what I do with the young people that I work with. And when I'm talking about young people, I'm dealing with probably 6 years, 7 years old and up. So that kind of young. And then I've got, teenager adolescents that I talk with. They're a little bit more, some of them, if they're set in their ways, it may be a little bit more of a challenge to say, because now you're trying to get them to change as opposed to learning something new and doing something new. You maybe now are trying to say, maybe you should consider doing something, not in these words, but not in this quickly and not in this way, but for the sake of brevity in an answer, I'd say, well, maybe you should think about doing things differently. So it's teaching those kinds of things. And when I say teaching, we do it at the family well-being facility that we have. But when we're down on the land where we do a lot of activities from May through September, it's engaging them constantly and doing those kinds of things, being respectful, being helpful. You know, when you see your neighbors doing something, if you think they could use your help, you're young, you're strapping, you're healthy. And I say that to males or females, that they're both equally capable. And I say, go over there and lend a hand and say, can I help you with this? The worst thing that's going to happen is they'll say, no, thanks, I can manage this. Okay, no harm. But it's just really teaching them to be good people and helping them try to get that way.
Thank you, Elder Donio. That was my only question. So Megwitch.
Ah, me
Could
bet
you
you
stay there for a moment, Mr. Rankin? I'm just wondering if I can ask a question that I thought Mr. Rankin had started at, and I was waiting for it. And I thought the question started today when you're working with young people. And you gave us an answer about how you teach them what I might summarize as how to be guided by the teachings of the seven grandfathers. I thought the question was, what might you say to them today on how they can achieve the good life? How they can, was I right in that?
That's correct, Your Honor.
How they can attain the good life?
Well,
What,
I'm sorry.
whether it's you, I think Mr. Rankin wants to know what you would teach them. But what are elders in the community, what are families in the community saying to youth today in 2023 about how they can attain or achieve the good life?
Shut that game thing off. But I think I and other elders would say the same thing of be a good person. Do good things for others. You may have to make sacrifices sometime. You may have to forsake your friends for doing some of the things that you do with the elder members of the community, but it's good to do these kinds of things. And again, really preaching the philosophy that reap what you sow, do good things unto others, and it will return unto you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Megwitch.
Megwitch.
Thank you, Elder Donio. It was great to hear from you this afternoon. I really appreciated Miigwech. I have no questions.
Oh, miigwech gegin. And miigwech gegin means, and thank you too.
Well, maybe we could just have that one more time and we'll all be able to say it.
I say miigwech gegin,
Yaging,
gegin.
gaging. Okay,
And we have no re-exam.
thank you very much. Miigwech,
Miigwech gegin.
it's a pleasure to have had you here today, and I very much, I believe, express everyone in the courtrooms. Thanks for your contribution.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to have been here and have been able to do this.
And we know you have traveled a long distance and you were able to avoid a certain airline, and so you had a comfortable trip.
But I'm here. I'm going to stick around for a little bit just.
Very good.
to
You're
be
very,
here.
you're very
It's
welcome.
nice. Okay.
All right, we'll finish for the day. And tomorrow is 10. Thank you. Could we go off record now?